For 30 years, I guarded her secret. I watched my daughter grow up believing she was loved, protected, and wanted, only to see her turn against me with venomous hatred. "I'm changing my last name to Mom's," she declared in that cold courthouse, looking straight through me as if I were already dead. His name disgusts me. But what happens when the name she so desperately wants to take isn't real? What will she do when she discovers her beloved mother, the woman she idolized while rejecting me, was living under a false identity, running from a past darker than either of us could have imagined? The truth about my wife's secrets is about to unravel our family completely, exposing a crime that will force my daughter to question everything she thought she knew about herself. If you've ever wondered how far you would go to protect someone you love, this story will haunt you long after it ends. Follow our channel now for more heartbreaking true stories. Hit like if this resonates with you, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just creates a different kind of prison. In the back of that cold courthouse, I could feel my hands trembling. At 63, I thought I'd lived through every kind of pain life could throw at a man. I was wrong. There's something about watching your only child publicly declare her hatred for you that cuts deeper than any knife could reach. I still remember how the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in that sickly, unforgiving glow. My daughter Ellie stood tall before the judge's desk, her spine straight as an arrow, her blonde hair, so much like her mother's, pulled back in a severe ponytail. There was a gleam in her eyes I recognized immediately. Vengeance. The same look Diana used to get when she felt wronged. "I'm changing my last name to my mother's," Ellie announced, her voice carrying through the hushed room. "His name disgusts me." The courthouse fell silent. Not even the scratch of the clerk's pen could be heard. My throat closed up as if invisible hands were choking me. I stood there, still clutching the small pink rose I'd bought from the flower shop on the corner, thinking she had asked me to come for some kind of reconciliation. I'd expected, hoped for, a hug. Instead, I was attending my own funeral. "Mr. Ellis," the judge said, glancing at me with what might have been pity, "are you here to contest this name change?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The rose in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "He has no say in who I am anymore," Ellie cut in, not even turning to look at me. "He forfeited that right long ago." The judge nodded, stamping something. "Very well, Miss Ellis, soon to be Miss Crawford." Crawford, Diana's maiden name. The name that would soon lead my daughter down a rabbit hole of lies so deep I feared she might never climb out. As Ellie gathered her paperwork, she finally turned toward the back of the room. Our eyes met for the briefest moment, and I saw something flicker behind the hatred. Uncertainty, perhaps. Or fear. She didn't know what she was doing. How could she? I had kept Diana's secrets buried for 30 years, thinking I was protecting my daughter. But secrets have a way of crawling out of their graves. "Ellie," I called out, my voice cracking. The first word I'd spoken since entering the courthouse. "Please, let me explain." But she was already walking away, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. The sound reminded me of a clock ticking down to something inevitable. The door swung shut behind her, and I was left alone under those buzzing lights, with only the sympathetic glance of the court clerk for company. Outside, the November wind cut through my jacket as I watched Ellie climb into her car across the parking lot. She didn't look back. I stood there, that damn rose still in my hand, as she drove away from me and toward a truth she wasn't ready to face. That night, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by framed photos I couldn't bear to put away, even after all that had happened. Ellie as a toddler, clutching that pink blanket Diana claimed to have bought at the hospital gift shop. Ellie at her high school graduation, already distant, but still letting me stand beside her for photos. And Diana, beautiful, mysterious Diana, smiling secrets into the camera lens. I poured myself a whiskey and stared at the phone, willing it to ring. It wouldn't. Not tonight. But soon, it would. Because when Ellie tried to legally claim her mother's maiden name, she would discover what I had known and hidden for decades. Diana Crawford didn't exist. Not really. The woman my daughter idolized, the woman whose memory she clung to while rejecting me, had been living a lie. And I had helped her maintain it. Out of love, out of fear, out of a desperate hope that the truth would never catch up to us. But it had. And now I had to decide. Would I continue to bury Diana's secrets? Or would I finally allow my daughter to know who she really was? Who her mother really was? And most terrifying of all, would Ellie ever forgive me when she discovered that her entire identity had been built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies? I finished my whiskey in one burning swallow and reached for the lockbox hidden at the back of my closet. Inside was the passport I should have destroyed years ago. The document that proved Diana Crawford was a fiction created by a woman named Martha Collier, a woman who was officially listed as deceased in another state. My hands shook as I opened it. Soon, my daughter would need answers, and I would have to decide how much of the truth I could bear to tell. The call came at 3:17 a.m. I know because I was staring at the red numbers on my bedside clock, unable to sleep as I had been since the courthouse. When the phone rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Nobody calls at that hour unless something terrible has happened. My arthritic fingers fumbled with the receiver. "Hello?" My voice was rough with exhaustion. "Dad." Just one word, and I could tell something was wrong. Ellie's voice trembled in a way I hadn't heard since she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. Back when she still crawled into my lap for comfort instead of looking at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. I sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. "Ellie? What's wrong?" There was a pause, filled only by her uneven breathing. Then, "The courthouse blocked the name change process. They said Mom's name doesn't appear anywhere in the system." "Dad, what's going on?" "They told me the name Diana Crawford doesn't exist in any database." My heart felt like it stopped mid-beat. I'd known this was coming, but not so soon. I thought I'd have more time to prepare, to decide what to say. But the truth was already clawing its way out, faster than I could control it. "There must be some mistake," I said, stalling. "Some clerical error. You know how government systems can be." "That's what I thought too." Her voice hardened slightly. "Until they told me they found a death certificate for someone with Mom's exact date of birth and social security number, but under a different name, in Arizona. Dad, they said the woman was registered as deceased in 1990. My mouth went dry. 3 years before she supposedly died in our lives. I closed my eyes, seeing again the passport hidden in my lockbox. Martha Collier, the woman Diana had sworn she'd left behind. Was Mom using a fake name? Ellie's voice cracked. Was everything about her a lie? I could hear the desperation in her question. She wanted me to deny it, to explain it all away with some simple, rational explanation. Something that wouldn't shatter the pedestal she'd placed her mother on all these years. "It's complicated, Ellie," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Complicated?" She laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "That's what you always say when you don't want to tell me something. Well, I'm not a child anymore. I deserve to know who my mother really was." She was right. But how could I tell her that the woman she'd idolized, the woman whose name she was so desperate to take as her own, had been running from the law? How could I explain that Diana, or Martha, had reasons for what she did that went beyond what any of us knew? "Your mother," I began, then stopped. How to start unraveling 30 years of careful deception? She had a difficult past. There were things she was trying to leave behind. Like what? Was she some kind of criminal? Ellie's voice rose, edged with panic. "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. "Nothing like that. She was just running from someone who hurt her. An ex-husband. She changed her name to protect herself." It was the story Diana had told me that night in 1993 when I confronted her about the passport. The story I'd accepted because I loved her too much to question it, because I wanted to believe she was the victim, not the perpetrator. "Then why is there a death certificate? Why would she fake her own death?" Ellie demanded. I remembered the night I found out. The newspaper clipping Diana didn't know I'd seen. The obituary for Martha Collier survived by no one. A convenient death that allowed Diana Crawford to be born. "I don't know all the details," I said. Another half-truth to add to the pile. She didn't like to talk about it. "Well, I need to know," Ellie said firmly. "I'm coming over tomorrow. And Dad, bring whatever you've been hiding all these years. Because I'm not leaving until I know exactly who Diana Crawford, or whoever she was, really was." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. Tomorrow. She was coming tomorrow. And I had less than 12 hours to decide how much of the truth I could bear to reveal. I got up and went to the closet, pulling out the old lockbox where I kept Diana's secrets. The passport, the newspaper clipping, the strange, cryptic notes she'd left behind, and at the very bottom, the one thing I'd never shown anyone, a photograph of a baby that wasn't Ellie but who looked so much like her that sometimes it made my blood run cold. Tomorrow, my daughter would demand answers, and I would have to choose between protecting Diana's memory and telling Ellie the truth she deserved to know. As I sorted through the fragments of my wife's hidden life, I wondered, was I ready to lose my daughter completely by revealing who her mother really was? The memory comes back to me in fragments, sharp-edged and painful, like pieces of broken glass I'm forced to hold. It was 1993. Seems like another lifetime now. The air was thick with the smell of Diana's perfume, something floral and expensive that she insisted on ordering from a specialty shop in New York. I remember thinking it was an unnecessary luxury for a young couple just starting out. But Diana had her standards. Always had. We'd been married for just 8 months. The honeymoon phase was supposed to be in full swing, but there was already something off between us. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Diana would sometimes stare out the window of our small suburban home in Ohio, with this faraway look in her eyes, like she was searching for something on the horizon, or watching for someone. That night in June, I came home late from the accounting firm where I worked. The house was quiet, too quiet. No TV humming in the background, no radio playing the jazz stations Diana loved, just silence, heavy and oppressive in the summer heat. "Diana?" I called out, loosening my tie as I made my way through the living room. No answer. Then I heard it, a muffled sobbing coming from our bathroom. The door was closed, a thin line of light visible underneath. I knocked gently. "Honey? You okay in there?" The sobbing stopped abruptly. There was a moment of complete silence, then a clatter, like something being dropped or hastily hidden. "Go away, Arthur." Her voice was razor sharp, nothing like the smooth, controlled tone she typically used. It startled me. In 8 months of marriage, I'd never heard her speak to me that way, like I was a stranger, an intruder. "Diana, what's wrong? Are you sick? Let me help." The door flew open so suddenly I stepped back. Diana stood there, her face blotchy from crying. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in black rivulets, but it was her eyes that froze me in place. Wide, almost feral with panic. "I said go away." She pushed past me, her shoulder hitting mine hard enough to make me stumble. I need some air. I'm going for a drive." Before I could stop her, she had grabbed her purse and car keys and was out the door. I heard her Volvo start up, tires screeching as she pulled out of our driveway too fast. I stood there, bewildered and worried. This wasn't like her at all. Diana was always composed, always in control. I'd seen her handle rude clients at her interior design job with a smile that never wavered. I'd seen her navigate awkward family dinners with my overbearing mother without breaking a sweat. Whatever had happened in that bathroom had cracked that perfect facade. I walked into the bathroom looking for clues. The counter was spotless. Too spotless, actually, like she'd wiped it down in a hurry. The trash can had been emptied. But there, fallen behind the toilet, was a small rectangle of dark blue cardboard. I picked it up. A passport cover. My heart began to race as I opened it. The photo was unmistakably Diana. Those high cheekbones, that slight asymmetry to her smile that I found so endearing. But the name printed beside it wasn't Diana Crawford Ellis. It was Martha Elizabeth Collier. My hands started to shake. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bathtub, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The passport was legitimate, or at least it looked that way to my untrained eye. It listed her birth date correctly, April 17th, 1965. But everything else was wrong. This passport said she was born in Phoenix, Arizona, not Boston, as she'd always told me. It had stamps from countries she'd never mentioned visiting. Diana, or Martha, had told me she'd never left the United States before our honeymoon to Cancun. But this passport told a different story. Multiple entries to Mexico, a trip to Panama, several visits to Canada. My mind raced with possibilities, each more alarming than the last. Was my wife living under a false identity? Was she some kind of criminal? A spy? Or was she running from something or someone so terrible she had to erase her entire past? The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me back to the present. Diana was back. I quickly slipped the passport into my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. When she walked in, she was composed again, her face freshly made up, her hair brushed smooth. If I hadn't seen her tears earlier, I would never have known anything was wrong. "I'm sorry about before," she said, her voice steady now, with that slight Boston accent I'd always found so charming. Was even that a lie? I wasn't feeling well, but I'm better now. I should have confronted her right then, demanded answers. But as she crossed the room and put her arms around me, I felt myself weakening. I loved this woman, whoever she was. "Diana?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who is Martha Collier?" She went completely still in my arms, then slowly pulled back, her face a mask of controlled panic. "Where did you hear that name?" Her voice was soft, dangerous. I pulled the passport from my pocket, her eyes fixed on it, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. Instead, she took a deep breath and led me to the couch. "Arthur," she said, taking my hands in hers, "there are things about my past I've never told you. Things I hoped would stay buried forever." That was the night Diana told me about her allegedly abusive ex-husband, about how she'd faked her own death to escape him, about how she'd created a new identity to stay safe. She cried in my arms, vulnerable and frightened. "I burned that passport," she whispered. "I don't know how it ended up in our bathroom." I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. But now, 30 years later, with my daughter demanding answers about the mother she thought she knew, I finally had to face the truth. Diana had lied to me that night, and the real story, the one involving our little girl, was far worse than I could have imagined. The morning after Ellie's phone call, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the fragments of Diana's hidden life. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, dusting the November landscape with white. It seemed fitting somehow, this cold blanket slowly covering everything, just as I had spent decades covering up the truth. I was about to call Ellie, to tell her I needed more time, when I heard the mail truck rumble up our street. Force of habit made me walk to the door, even though these days the mail rarely brought anything but bills and junk. I shuffled down the driveway, my slippers leaving dark impressions in the fresh snow. Among the usual envelopes was a plain white one with no return address. Just my name and address written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. I tore it open as I walked back to the house, my fingers clumsy with cold and a strange, creeping dread. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, the kind torn from a cheap notebook. The handwriting was cramped and slanted, as if written in a hurry or by someone elderly. It read, "Mr. Ellis, you don't know me. My name is Shirley Donovan from Lincoln, Nebraska. I've spent the last 30 years searching for my niece, a baby girl who disappeared in 1992. I believe your ex-wife may have taken her. The baby's name was Eleanor May Donovan. She was just 6 months old when she vanished from her crib. I've enclosed a photo. If you know anything at all, please call me. This number will reach me day or night." Below was a phone number with a Nebraska area code. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the letter down on the table to keep from dropping it. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out a small, faded photograph. It showed a smiling young couple holding a baby wrapped in a pale pink blanket, with a distinctive pattern of tiny yellow ducks along the border. The same blanket Diana had always claimed she bought at the hospital gift shop the day we brought Ellie home from the adoption agency. The blanket that had been Ellie's favorite comfort object until she was almost 7 years old. My legs gave out, and I collapsed into a kitchen chair. The room seemed to tilt and spin around me as 30 years of carefully constructed reality began to crumble. I'd always known Diana was hiding something about Ellie's adoption. The paperwork had seemed off. Too clean, too perfect, processed too quickly. But I'd convinced myself it was just Diana's efficiency, her connections, her determination to fast-track the process. "She needs us, Arthur," Diana had said, cradling the infant in her arms that first night. "She has no one else in the world." But that wasn't true, was it? This baby, our Ellie, had a family that had been searching for her for 3 decades. I picked up the photograph again, studying the faces of the young couple. The man had Ellie's high forehead and wide-set eyes. The woman had her smile, that slight dimple on the left side. These were Ellie's biological parents, not strangers who had given her up for adoption, as Diana had claimed, but a family who had lost her. My mind raced back to that time. Diana had appeared with Ellie seemingly out of nowhere. We'd been talking about adoption for months, visiting agencies, filling out paperwork. Then one day, Diana called me at work, her voice breathless with excitement. "It happened, Arthur. The agency called. They have a baby for us, a little girl. I'm going to pick her up right now. Be home by 6, okay? You're going to be a daddy tonight. I'd left work early, stopping to buy flowers and a stuffed bear. When I arrived home, Diana was sitting in the rocking chair we'd bought for the nursery, a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Meet our daughter, Eleanor," she'd said. "Isn't she perfect?" And she was. From that first moment, I loved that little girl with every fiber of my being. I never questioned the adoption again, even when the promised paperwork was always being processed or lost in the system. Diana handled it all, as she did everything in our lives. But now, holding this letter, staring at this photograph, I had to face the unthinkable. Ellie wasn't adopted. She was taken. Stolen from her crib by a woman running from her past. A woman who needed a child to complete her new identity as Diana Crawford. And I, in my blind love and trust, had become an unwitting accomplice. The phone rang, jarring me from my shocked stupor. It was Ellie. "Dad, I've been trying to get information from the records office, but they keep stonewalling me. They're saying Mom's social security number was registered to someone else. How is that possible?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up, choked with 30 years of lies. "Dad, are you there?" "Yes," I finally managed. "Ellie, I think you should come over now. Not later. Now." "Why? What's going on?" Her voice rose slightly, edged with concern. I looked down at the photograph in my trembling hand. "There's something you need to see. Something I just found out." That wasn't entirely true. Deep down, I think I'd always known there was something wrong about Ellie's adoption. I just hadn't wanted to face it. Hadn't wanted to lose the family I loved so desperately. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Ellie said, and hung up. I sat there at the kitchen table, surrounded by the scattered puzzle pieces of my wife's deception, and tried to imagine how I could possibly tell my daughter, the person I loved most in this world, that her entire life had been built on a foundation of lies, that the mother she idolized might have been a kidnapper, that the father she resented had been too weak, too lovesick to see the truth. And worse, how could I tell her that the family she never knew she had, her real family, had been searching for her all this time? I couldn't show Ellie the letter right away. There was something else I needed to find first, something that might explain Diana's actions, or at least provide some context for the bombshell I was about to drop on our daughter. So I left a note on the door telling Ellie I'd be back soon and headed to the old storage shed behind the property. The shed sat at the far end of my backyard, half hidden by overgrown rhododendrons that Diana had planted years ago. I hadn't been inside in at least 5 years. The padlock was rusted, and it took several attempts with the key before it finally gave way with a reluctant groan. The air inside was stale and cold, thick with dust that danced in the weak shafts of winter light filtering through the dirty windows. Cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls, labeled in Diana's precise handwriting. Christmas, tax records 1990, 1995, Arthur's college things. A collection of normal family detritus that gave no hint of the secrets hidden among them. At the very back, covered by an old tarp, was the trunk. Black leather with brass fittings. It had belonged to Diana's grandmother, or so she claimed. Like everything else about my wife, I now had to question even that small detail. Had the trunk belonged to Martha Collier's grandmother? Or was it just another prop in Diana Crawford's elaborately constructed life? I dragged it out into the center of the shed, leaving a trail in the dust. The key was where I remembered it, taped to the underside of the trunk's lid, Diana's hiding spot that she thought I didn't know about. My fingers trembled as I fitted it into the lock. Inside, beneath layers of tissue paper, lay Diana's keepsakes, photo albums I'd never been allowed to look through, jewelry boxes containing pieces I'd never seen her wear, and at the very bottom, a thick manila envelope sealed with wax. I broke the seal and emptied the contents onto the dusty floor of the shed. Letters, newspaper clippings, official-looking documents, all the pieces of Diana's past that she'd kept hidden, even from me, especially from me. One piece of paper caught my eye immediately, a handwritten letter on pale blue stationery, folded and refolded so many times the creases had started to tear. Diana's handwriting, but not the careful script I was used to. This was wild, almost frantic. The blue ink blotched in places as if tears had fallen while she wrote. "If one day everything comes to light," it began, "tell Ellie I did this because she needed to be protected from her own parents." My heart pounded painfully against my ribs as I read on. Diana, or Martha, had convinced herself that Ellie's biological parents were abusing her. She described hearing the baby cry through the walls of her apartment, claimed she had seen bruises, reported her concerns to child services only to be ignored. "I couldn't leave her there to suffer," Diana wrote. "Not when I could give her a real home, real love. What I did was wrong in the eyes of the law, but right in the eyes of God and any mother. Someday if she finds out, I hope she'll understand I saved her life." My hands shook as I turned the letter over, looking for more. Instead, I found a small document stapled to the back, a hospital receipt. Not for our local hospital, but for Lakeside Children's Psychiatric Facility in Nebraska. The patient name listed was Eleanor May Donovan. The date was just 2 weeks before Diana had appeared with our adopted baby. I stared at the receipt, trying to make sense of it. Had Diana, Martha, been stalking this family? Had she somehow gotten access to the baby's medical records? Or had she manufactured this receipt herself, creating evidence of abuse to justify her actions in her own mind? I would never know for certain. Diana had taken that truth to her grave 15 years ago, when her car skidded off the road during a rainstorm and wrapped itself around a tree. The woman I'd loved, the woman I thought I'd known, had been a puzzle with missing pieces from the very beginning. A car door slammed in the driveway, jolting me back to the present. Ellie was here. I hastily gathered the papers, shoving them back into the envelope, but keeping Diana's letter and the hospital receipt separate. These at least I needed to show our daughter. Our daughter. The phrase stuck in my mind as I trudged back through the light snow toward the house. Was she even ours anymore? Had she ever been? Or had I been living with a ghost child all these years? A little girl who belonged to someone else who had been mourned by parents I'd never met? Ellie was pacing on the front porch when I reached the house, her breath visible in the cold air. She wore her mother's impatience in the set of her shoulders, the tap of her foot. "Where were you?" she demanded as I approached. Then she saw the envelope in my hand, and something in her face changed. Fear, maybe, or recognition that whatever was inside would change everything. I unlocked the door without speaking, and we went inside to the kitchen where Shirley's letter and the photograph still lay on the table. Ellie's eyes went immediately to the photo. "Who are they?" she asked, picking it up. "And why does that baby have my blanket? The one with the ducks?" I sank into a chair across from her, suddenly feeling every one of my 63 years. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been a lie? That the mother they've idolized was capable of the unthinkable? That the father they've resented may have been a fool, but was also a victim of the same elaborate deception? "Ellie," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to sit down. There's something I have to tell you about your mother, about Diana, and about how you came to be our daughter." She sat slowly, her face draining of color as she looked from the photograph to the letter from Nebraska, to the hospital receipt in my trembling hands. "Dad," she said, and for the first time in years, I heard fear rather than anger in the way she said that word. "What did Mom do?" I took a deep breath and began to tell her the truth, or at least the truth as far as I could piece it together from the fragments Diana had left behind. Ellie's face grew paler with each word I spoke, her fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily now, coating the world in silence, as if even nature was holding its breath while I unleashed 30 years of secrets. "So you're telling me," she said when I finally fell silent, her voice thin and brittle as ice, "that Mom, that Diana, kidnapped me? That my entire life has been a lie?" I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, standing up so abruptly her chair tipped over backward with a crash that seemed to echo through the quiet house. "Ellie, please." "No." Her eyes were wild, darting around the kitchen as if looking for an escape route. "This is insane. You're making this up because you're angry that I wanted to take her name instead of yours." The accusation struck me like a physical blow. Even now, after everything, she thought I was capable of such cruelty. "Why would I make this up?" I asked quietly, gesturing to the evidence spread across the table. "Look at the photograph, Ellie. Look at that blanket, the same one you carried everywhere until 2nd grade. Look at these people. You have his eyes, her smile. Coincidence?" she whispered, but I could see doubt creeping into her expression. She picked up the photograph again, studying it more closely. "This doesn't prove anything. Lots of babies have similar blankets." "Then explain the letter from Shirley Donovan. Explain the hospital receipt Diana kept hidden." Explain why the courthouse couldn't find any record of Diana Crawford's existence. She shook her head, backing away from the table. I need to go. I need to think. Wait, I said, rising from my chair with effort. My knees protested the sudden movement, a sharp reminder of my age. There's something else we can do. Something that would prove it one way or another. She paused at the doorway, her coat half on. What? A DNA test. If these people really are your biological family, a test would confirm it. Ellie let out a laugh that contained no humor. And how exactly would we do that? Ask this Shirley person to send us a cheek swab in the mail? I took a deep breath. I think we need to contact her. I think you need to hear what she has to say. Absolutely not. Ellie's voice rose sharply. This is crazy, Dad. You're asking me to call some stranger who claims I was kidnapped as a baby? Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? She wasn't wrong. It did sound insane. It was insane. But the evidence before us was too compelling to ignore. Then let me do it, I said. Let me call her. I'll ask her to send something, a hair sample, anything, and we can have it tested against yours. If it doesn't match, we'll drop this whole thing. You can change your name to Crawford and I'll never mention any of this again. Ellie stood frozen in the doorway, conflict playing across her face. I could see the battle waging inside her, the desire to cling to the identity she'd always known versus the creeping doubt that couldn't be ignored. Fine, she said at last. Call her, but I'm not talking to her, and I'm not promising anything. She walked out then, slamming the front door behind her. Through the window, I watched her sit in her car for a long moment, head bowed over the steering wheel, before finally driving away. I picked up the phone with a trembling hand and dialed the number from Shirley's letter. It rang 4 times before a wavering elderly voice answered. Hello? Ms. Donovan, this is Arthur Ellis. I received your letter. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Mr. Ellis, thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if you would. I need to know more, I said, sinking back into my chair. About your niece, about her parents, and I need to ask if you'd be willing to provide a DNA sample. Of course, she said immediately. Anything, does this mean... Do you think? I don't know, I admitted. But there are similarities and questions about my wife's past that I can't answer. Your wife, Shirley said quietly. Martha Collier. The name still sounded strange to me, even after finding the passport all those years ago. Yes, though I knew her as Diana Crawford. Mr. Ellis, there's something else you should know. About my niece's parents, my nephew and his wife. I braced myself, unsure what new revelation was coming. Go on. They're both gone now. Car accident 10 years ago. Eleanor, if she is Eleanor, has cousins, aunts, uncles, family who've never stopped looking for her. But her parents, they never got to see her grow up. A strange mixture of grief and relief washed over me. Grief for these people I'd never met, who'd lost their child and then lost their lives without ever knowing what happened. Relief that Ellie wouldn't have to face them, wouldn't have to choose between the family she knew and the family she never had. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. There's something else, Shirley continued, about why Martha, Diana, might have taken her. There were rumors, you see, about my nephew and his wife. Rumors that weren't true, but that child services investigated anyway. My mind flashed to the hospital receipt, to Diana's frantic letter. What kind of rumors? That they were hurting the baby, that Eleanor's crying wasn't normal, that the bruises on her arms were from rough handling. Shirley's voice cracked. None of it was true. The investigation cleared them completely. Eleanor had a medical condition, a mild form of colic that made her cry more than most babies, and the bruises came from blood tests at the hospital, trying to diagnose her. I closed my eyes, pieces falling into place. Diana had lived in the same apartment building, had befriended the young couple. She'd heard the baby crying, seen the bruises, jumped to conclusions, or at least, that's what she'd told herself to justify taking a child that wasn't hers. Ms. Donovan, I'll have the DNA test done as soon as possible, but I need to warn you. My daughter, Ellie, doesn't want to meet you. At least, not yet. This has been a shock for her. I understand, Shirley said, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. I've waited 30 years, Mr. Ellis. I can wait a little longer. After we hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen as darkness fell, surrounded by the fragments of Diana's deceptions. I had one more task to complete before Ellie returned. Using an old hairbrush of hers that still sat in the upstairs bathroom, I carefully collected several strands of her hair, sealing them in a clean envelope. Tomorrow I would send this, along with whatever sample Shirley provided, to a private DNA testing facility. And then we would know for certain whether the woman I'd loved had committed the unthinkable, and whether the daughter I'd raised belonged to someone else. 2 weeks passed like a slow-motion car crash. Ellie barely spoke to me, communicating mostly through terse text messages asking if the DNA results had arrived yet. I moved through my days in a fog of anxiety and dread, jumping whenever the phone rang or the mail arrived. The DNA kit from Shirley came 3 days after our call, a small padded envelope containing several strands of graying hair, and a handwritten note that simply said, "This was from my sister Eleanor's grandmother. Please let me know what you find out." I sent it off, along with Ellie's hair sample, to a private testing facility that promised results within 10 business days. On day 9, Ellie showed up at my door unannounced. Her face was drawn, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd been sleeping as poorly as I had. "I want to see Mom's grave," she said without preamble. I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Her grave. I want to go there. Now." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but her eyes held a feverish intensity that worried me. "Why?" "Ellie, what's going on?" She pushed past me into the house, her movements jerky and agitated. "Because I need to see something for myself. The death certificate. You said it listed her as Martha Collier, right? Not Diana Crawford?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, that's right. The coroner needed her legal identification. I couldn't hide who she really was at that point. Then I want to see the grave. I want to see what name is on the headstone." I understood then. She was looking for proof. Something concrete she could see with her own eyes, touch with her own hands. Something more real than old photographs and mysterious letters. "All right," I said, reaching for my coat. "We'll go now." The drive to the cemetery was silent and tense. Ellie stared out the window, her profile sharp against the gray winter landscape. I wondered what was going through her mind, whether she was preparing herself to accept the truth or steeling herself to reject it. Cedar Hill Cemetery was deserted when we arrived, the recent snow undisturbed except for a lone set of footprints leading to a distant corner. Diana's grave was in the eastern section, beneath an old oak tree that would bloom with leaves in the spring. Now its bare branches reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers. I hung back, letting Ellie approach the grave alone. She stood before the simple headstone, motionless for a long moment. From where I stood, I could see what she was seeing. Martha Elizabeth Collier, April 17th, 1965, September 3rd, 2010, beloved wife and mother. I'd chosen those words carefully, avoiding both the name Diana and any mention of her being a good or loving person. It had felt like the closest I could come to honesty while still maintaining some semblance of respect. Ellie slowly sank to her knees in the snow, heedless of the cold and damp seeping through her jeans. She reached out a trembling hand to trace the engraved letters of her mother's true name. "All this time," she whispered, her voice carrying in the stillness of the cemetery. "All this time I didn't even know her real name." I approached cautiously, standing just behind her. "I didn't either, Ellie, not until after she died." She looked up at me, tears freezing on her cheeks in the biting cold. "That's a lie. You found her passport. You knew." "I knew she had another identity," I admitted, "but she told me it was to escape an abusive ex-husband." I believed her, Ellie. I wanted to believe her. Ellie turned back to the grave, shoulders hunched. "Why didn't you ever tell me, even after she died?" I sank down beside her, my aging knees protesting the cold ground. "Because I thought I was protecting you. Because I didn't know the whole truth myself until now. Because..." I hesitated, then forced myself to continue. "Because I was afraid you would hate me for not seeing through her lies." "I do hate you," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "I hate both of you." We sat there in silence, the cold seeping into our bones. Above us, a crow cawed harshly from the oak tree, the sound echoing through the empty cemetery. Finally, Ellie spoke again, her voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear her. "When did you know? About me, I mean. When did you suspect I wasn't really adopted?" I chose my words carefully. I never knew for certain, but there were inconsistencies. The adoption paperwork was never quite right. Diana was secretive about the agency, the process. And when you were about 3, a neighbor commented that you looked exactly like Diana. Same eyes, same smile. Diana was so upset by that comment, she insisted we move to a different neighborhood. Ellie nodded slowly, as if putting puzzle pieces together in her mind. She was always paranoid about people watching us. I used to think she was just overprotective. She was terrified of being caught, I said gently. Of losing you. Ellie reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She smoothed it against her knee, and I recognized it as one of Diana's letters from the manila envelope. You left this out on the table, she said. I took it before I left that day. I glanced at the letter, another of Diana's frantic, handwritten confessions that I hadn't yet had a chance to read fully. She writes here about saving me, Ellie continued, her voice hollow, about how my real parents were hurting me and no one would help. She convinced herself she was rescuing me. She looked up, eyes haunted. Was any of that true? Or was it just what she told herself to justify stealing someone else's baby? I don't know, I answered honestly. Shirley Donovan told me there were rumors, investigations, but she said your biological parents were cleared of any wrongdoing. Ellie's hand clenched, crumpling the letter. So she just took me, because she wanted a baby and decided I should be hers. I think she wasn't well, Ellie. The woman I knew as Diana had moments of paranoia, of obsession. Looking back, there were signs of mental illness that I ignored or explained away because I loved her. Ellie stood suddenly, brushing snow from her jeans. I want to see the death certificate, the official one, not just the headstone. And I want to know who this woman really was. Martha Collier, not the fiction of Diana Crawford. Her voice hardened. If I'm going to change my name, I want to know exactly what name I'm taking. The county clerk's office should have a copy, I said, rising stiffly to my feet. We can go there now if you want. She nodded sharply and turned to walk back to the car, pausing once to look back at the grave. In that moment, with her profile outlined against the winter sky, she looked so much like Diana, like Martha, that my heart ached. Whatever the DNA test revealed, whatever name Ellie chose to take, she would always carry a part of the complicated, troubled woman who had raised her. And as I followed my daughter through the snow, I wondered if that was Diana's final victory, that even in revealing her lies, we were still defined by them. Today I write these words from my recliner by the window, watching the first snowfall of what my doctor says will likely be my last winter. My heart has been failing for months now, a poetic end, perhaps, for a man who failed in so many other ways during his life. The pen feels heavy in my arthritic fingers, but I need to finish this before the end comes. I need to leave something behind that tells our story, not just for Ellie, but for myself. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday, 3 days after our visit to Diana's grave. I remember the envelope sitting on my kitchen table, innocuous and ordinary, as if it didn't contain the final confirmation of a 30-year deception. When I called Ellie to tell her the results had come, she asked me not to open it until she arrived. I agreed, though my hands itched to tear into it, to finally know the truth beyond any doubt. She arrived within the hour, her face composed but eyes betraying her anxiety. Without a word, she picked up the envelope and carefully opened it, pulling out the crisp pages inside. I watched her eyes scan the document, her expression unchanging until she reached the conclusion. 99.8% probability of relation, she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Consistent with first-degree family relationship, she set the paper down gently, as if it might shatter. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking of the kitchen clock seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. So it's true, she finally said. All of it. I'm Eleanor Donovan, not Eleanor Ellis, not Ellie Crawford. She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. Who am I, Dad? If I'm not who I thought I was for 30 years, then who am I? I reached across the table to take her hand, and for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. You're still you, Ellie. The same person you've always been. Your name, your history, those might change, but who you are inside doesn't have to. She shook her head slowly. But it does change. Everything changes. My mother wasn't my mother. She was my kidnapper. And you, I loved you, I said simply. From the moment Diana, Martha, placed you in my arms, I loved you. That much is true, no matter what else was a lie. Ellie's eyes met mine, searching. Did you know? Deep down, did you suspect what she'd done? I wanted to lie to protect myself from her judgment, but I'd done enough of that over the years. I suspected something wasn't right about the adoption. But I never allowed myself to think, to imagine that she might have stolen you. I chose not to see the truth because I couldn't bear to lose either of you. She nodded slowly, accepting this. What do we do now? Do I call this Shirley person? Do I suddenly have cousins and aunts and uncles I've never met? Do I go back to being Eleanor Donovan? That's for you to decide, I told her. But whatever you choose, I'll support you. And if you want to meet your biological family, I'll go with you, if you want me there. That was 6 months ago. Since then, so much has changed, yet so much remains the same. Ellie did choose to meet Shirley, a frail woman in her 80s with the same determined set to her chin that Ellie has when she's made up her mind about something. They met at a cafe halfway between our town and Lincoln, Nebraska. I sat in the car, giving them privacy for their first meeting, watching through the window as an elderly woman embraced my daughter, with the desperate relief of someone finding a treasure they thought was lost forever. Over the next few months, Ellie met other members of the Donovan family, cousins, an uncle, a great aunt. She saw photographs of her biological parents, heard stories about their search for her, learned that they had never given up hope of finding their daughter until the day they died. But she didn't change her name to Donovan, nor did she keep Ellis. In a quiet ceremony at the county courthouse, the same one where she had once tried to take her mother's fictional name, she legally became Eleanor May. Not Ellis, not Crawford, not Donovan, just Eleanor May. Her own person, with a name that honored her origins but wasn't tied to anyone else's legacy. I'm tired of being defined by other people's choices, she told me afterward. This way, I get to decide who I am. The envelope I've prepared for her sits on my desk, sealed and addressed. Inside are all the remaining letters from Diana, Martha that I found in the storage shed. All the documents, the newspaper clippings, everything I know about the woman who stole her and raised her, and among them my own letter. My dearest Ellie, forgive me for loving you with fear instead of courage. I was so afraid of losing you that I chose blindness over truth. I told myself I was protecting you, but in reality, I was protecting myself from a world without you in it. Your mother, and yes, despite everything, Diana was your mother in all the ways that mattered day to day, was not an evil woman. She was troubled, desperate, convinced of her own righteousness in a way that only the truly damaged can be. I believe she loved you with every fiber of her being, even if that love began with an unforgivable act. And I loved you both. Perhaps that was my greatest failing, loving too much, questioning too little. But it was also my greatest joy. Whatever path you choose now, whatever name you take, know that you were loved completely if imperfectly, and know that the man who was privileged to be your father, in heart if not in blood, is proud of the woman you've become despite the broken foundation we gave you. With all my love, Arthur. The doctor says my heart won't last through February. The medication helps with the pain, but nothing can repair the damage of decades of strain. Soon I will join Diana, Martha, in whatever comes after this life. I hope when that time comes that I'll have the courage to face her with the truth, that I knew more than I admitted, that I suspected what she'd done but chose to look away, that I was complicit in her crime through my silence. And I hope that Ellie, whatever name she carries forward, will someday find it in her heart to remember not just the lies we told, but the love that moved alongside them, tangled and flawed, but real nonetheless. That is my story. My name is Arthur Ellis, the name she abandoned, but that still loves her, even if no longer remembered. Sometimes the most devastating truths are the ones we've buried beneath years of love and good intentions. Arthur's story reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood or legal documents, but by the countless moments of love, sacrifice, and care that build a life together. What would you have done in his position? Would you have revealed the truth earlier, risking everything? Or would you too have chosen to protect the fragile happiness of the child you raised as your own? We all carry secrets, some small, some life-altering. But it's what we do when those secrets inevitably surface that defines who we truly are. Ellie chose to forge her own identity beyond the lies and deceptions that shaped her childhood. Arthur chose to face his failings with courage in his final days. And Diana, despite her unforgivable crime, chose to love the child she stole with everything she had. Their story isn't just about deception, it's about the complicated, messy reality of human love. If this story touched your heart or made you think about the secrets in your own family, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates stories about the complexities of family bonds. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that explore the deepest aspects of human relationships. And remember, sometimes the most important question isn't what is the truth, but rather, what will we do with the truth once we discover it?